Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, live after Michigan State's first round game against the 15 seed Bryant Bulldogs, where MSU won 87-62. Before we get into that, discussion about the game, a quick word of thanks to our one-time supporters Niels DeCow on Venmo and Nomad Anglers on PayPal. I checked out the Nomad Anglers website. They've got a couple of branches in Grand Rapids, Lansing, and I've always wanted to do fly fishing. I've just never gotten around to it, but they have some really cool like fly fishing stuff. So check it
Great.
out. It's pretty cool. Yeah. Anyway, really appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much. Get some light on me here. Good birthday present for me. So it's nice for Michigan State to get the win. I do want to apologize also for as much as I talked about the bracket and told everyone to sign up. I sent a message to Gabe and all our sponsors. I forgot to fill out the bracket myself. So, so
I
I have.
and just a peek behind the scenes. And I think I'm probably still in really good shape. After yesterday, I was third out of 140, and I looked through the list and I couldn't find. I found one for Eric, but it wasn't entered. So I thought, well, maybe he changed his name for this year. So I asked him. I said, "So where's your bracket?" And
Yeah.
that's when I found out.
Yeah. It's like the cobbler's son, right? Has no shoes. So anyway, there we go. So if I was on there, I would be bottomish of the pack. So don't feel like you're missing much. You almost for sure did better than me. I've not had a chance to look at the bracket since obviously super late game here. We're coming to you live after. Um, so let's talk about the game a little bit, Rod. It was a Bryant was tough. They showed a lot of guts. They were a big team. All the things we talked about, and they put up a good strong fight. And I think that Michigan State came out tight, or at least maybe too amped up, or something like that, because they just definitely didn't look themselves. I mean, Jace Richardson was wild on his first two field
Yeah.
goal attempts, which is very uncharacteristic for him. Jeremy was going just like 1 or 2 miles per hour too fast, and so anyway, I think they just were looking a little bit out of sorts. Jaden kind of had a calming influence, and then certainly Coen Carr. Once he came into the game, he was a huge. I mean, what a huge game he had,
Uh,
and he was the difference maker in the first half. And then so a 5 point deficit in the first half by Michigan State, they turned into a 5 point halftime lead, and it was tight for about 5 minutes in the second half, and then they just slowly pulled away and started hitting some outside shots, and then it was just snowballed as they just took over both at the free throw line and then on the offensive glass and just finished off Bryant to finish with a what looks like a very comfortable 25-point win, but it was very much in doubt for at least we'll say 25 minutes of the game.
I'd say that's about right. But that's what Michigan State is. I didn't expect that they were going to be up 20 at the break. I figured, and we were talking before we started the pregame show with Jay Wright, Seth Davis, and Candace Parker. They all kind of landed on the same thought, which was they expected Michigan State to be up at the half, but not necessarily to deliver a knockout blow, but gradually over the course of the second half to wear them out. Well, that tells me they've done a little bit. Jay Wright obviously knows,
Yeah.
but they've done a little bit of research on Michigan State because that is, of course, the formula for Michigan State's success this year. Now, we didn't see it in the last game of the regular season because, frankly, Michigan State had stolen the soul from Michigan by halftime anyway. So there
Yeah.
wasn't a need for that. And then we didn't see it. Um, the Oregon game in the Big Ten tournament, I don't think was really decisively. That was, again, a game where they had a really good start and just kind of maintained it. And we didn't see it, of course, in the Wisconsin game. So it had been, 2, 3 games where you
Yeah.
hadn't really seen that. But that has been the formula during the course of the season. And so it was not surprising to see that show up again. What I was most impressed by is this though, and I absolutely think I'll actually watch Phil Martelli Jr.'s post game press conference to see if he had the same thought. But I think this was pretty obvious. You mentioned Bryant was tough, and they were competing. They were absolutely competing on the glass for pretty much the majority of the first half. I don't know that I've ever seen a more dominant half from a rebounding perspective. If I have, it probably has to go back to when Antonio Smith was here. Michigan State absolutely obliterated
Yeah.
that team on the boards. That was the difference. And I think what happened is what you would expect. Bryant wore down.
Hmm.
They were tired, and you could see it. Michigan State was fresher. They were quicker to the ball in the second half. And that really was the fundamental thing. I mean, yeah, MSU made shots. A lot of those came off offensive rebounds,
That's
right?
very true. Yeah.
Um, and and so I think that's where the analysis really starts. The other thing I would say as a reason for Michigan State wearing them down, and again, this is something we see all the time. Michigan State played a really, I felt, a pretty damn good 40 minutes of defense. That is, they're not a great, as we talked about in the pregame, they're not a great jump shooting team,
Right.
but they've got a couple guys who can hit shots. And their size, their positional size across the board makes them difficult to guard. And we saw that on occasion where they would get somebody. Timberlake, I thought, who really did mostly play up to his advanced billing. Not entirely, but mostly. He was a very difficult cover because he would get a smaller guard isolated on him and then just go to work.
Yeah.
And they have the positional size to do that. But I thought, even considering that, I really liked the way Michigan State guarded in this game. And I think that wears on you. And then the third thing, 100% a factor, was the pace. I mean, we'll get back to this when we talk about the keys, but
Yeah.
you said,
Right.
well, Bryant wants to play fast. And at a certain point in this game, whether they wanted to or not, it was going to be played fast.
Yeah.
And and they just couldn't, yeah, they couldn't do anything. I mean, well, we'll get back to that when we get to the keys. But I guess on individuals, you start with Coen Carr because he was the reason Michigan State led at halftime instead of
Right.
trailed. And I talk occasionally here about having those 95th percentile players, the guys who can just go out and do something oftentimes physically that even on a floor filled with high level basketball players, nobody else can do. Well, you saw that over and over and over from Coen
Yeah.
Carr, particularly in the first half, where he just made plays nobody else was. And that's, again, that's a big, reasonably athletic, not super, super athletic, but reasonably so, I think, for Bryant team with some guys who have played. They have three guys who have played high major basketball. One of them was a top 50 recruit, Timberlake. So there are real players. This wasn't like a UC San Diego where everybody's 6'6" and below and they're not particularly athletic.
Yeah.
Um, and Coen Carr was just killing everybody, just slaughtering them, and it kept MSU alive. And then in the second half, he got off to a good start, did some things early in the second half. And then from there, I thought the baton got passed to some extent to Jace Richardson. You mentioned, and I agree, he was pressing early. I think it took him about 10 minutes to really settle into this game.
Yeah.
And once he did, he hit that big three. He had a bucket earlier, but he hit that big three with that late run that put MSU up 7 late in the first half. And
Right.
from there, it was just, I mean, I don't even know. I haven't really looked at
He finished with
his,
15, but
yeah.
he probably had 10, I'm
Well,
guessing,
he
in
had
that
10 in
second
the second
half.
half.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I thought that was definitely the case, but there were a lot of guys. I mean, I thought Jeremy Fears, he had 11 points, 6 assists, 3 turnovers. The turnovers, I think, came early.
yeah.
But Jeremy Fears was fantastic pushing the ball in transition. I
And
thought
guarding
Trey
too. Like there was a
and
one
guard,
point in the
absolutely.
second half where it was not, it was like 10 points or something. And he switched on to a bigger guy. He contested enough and just forced the guy, and I remember who it was, to change his shot. I think it might have been
Yep,
Mitchell. And anyway, even go with all that size and those little things are the things that make a big difference for this team. That connectivity that they talk about all the time.
absolutely. And I thought Trey played well tonight also. I thought MSU absolutely had that two-headed monster at the point that we talk about, and the reality of it is that frequently this year, one or the other has had a better game. You know,
Yeah.
it hasn't been all that common that both have been absolutely at the top of their game. I thought tonight was pretty close to that.
Yep.
And when that happens, I mean, look out. Jaden Akins, decent game. I mean, I don't know what
I mean, from
the
aside from
shooting
shooting,
numbers were.
four
Yeah,
for 15
four
from
for
the
15.
field.
Man, it didn't seem to me like he took that many, but I guess
Yeah.
it's there. And 2 for 10 from three. Yeah, not great,
No.
but he made. I'll tell you what was big. I thought the fact that he hit that first three
Yeah, and both halves.
settled right. Both of those settled Michigan State into it. You
Yeah.
know, those were important shots. And again, I thought he was important defensively. Um, and then from there, I thought the rebounding numbers in this game are, of course, ridiculous. Jackson Kohler only 4 points, but he had 9 boards.
Yep.
Um,
Cooper had 9, Carr had
Cooper had
9.
6 points and 9 boards.
Yeah.
Carr with a crazy rebounding game, 9. I mean, Akins at 5. They Richardson 3. I mean, they really spread the wealth there. But I think defensively, it was very much a team effort, as it usually has to be, and it was. Rebounding, it was absolutely a team effort. I think everybody contributed there. And
Yep.
then offensively, they got enough good basketball out of enough people uh, to put this one away. But again, as we talked about kind of at the outset, I think the story of this game, very simply put, is that Michigan State and their depth will wear you out.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Yeah.
have to be a very unique kind of team to not feel the impact of that. Now, it's possible. I'm not saying nobody, obviously, I'm not saying nobody in the country can do that, but it's a very difficult trick to turn. It's why they won the Big Ten by 3 games and lapped
Yeah.
the field,
Right.
you
Exactly.
know?
Yeah.
And so that was, I think that was the macro story. And then when you get into the details of it, I think the thing that shows up more than anything else, what you start with is the rebounding was just crazy.
Yeah. Well,
Against
and
a
I think
good rebounding opponent, too, by the way, at least on the offensive end.
right, and they were real active and pretty successful early in that first half, which
Yep.
is when they were sort of doing all their damage, and then they just sort of disappeared at that
Nothing in
point.
the tank. Yep.
And I even think, yeah, I mean, it was the second half. They might have had one or two. I mean, I don't have this. I don't have the half splits,
It
but
couldn't have been
anyway,
much more than that.
yeah, it was. It certainly was enough. It wasn't impactful. Um, yeah, I always feel like with just kind of more sort of broadly, sort of 1,000 foot view of this too. I think when it comes to the NCAA tournament, for teams that make really deep runs, they usually have one or two. They usually have a game where they just completely annihilate someone. And I feel like if you struggle throughout the tournament, at some point someone's going to get you. And so I think the fact that this team really pulled away and had what is actually was turned out to be a very comfortable win once they got rolling, I think is a good sign and that they can advance a ways here. And I
I
think
think that's often true. What the question becomes
well, when you're
where
playing these
where
kind of schools, I mean, I'm just saying, if you're a 7 seed, you
but
don't expect to blow anyone out by 25, but
right, but the oftentimes the question becomes where in the path does that annihilation happen? Because if you
sure,
go back to Michigan State's last Final Four appearance, they did not have that kind of game against Bradley.
that's
And
true.
that was a 215.
Hmm.
They kind of did. I don't remember the final margins, but I remember how the games felt. The next 2 rounds against Minnesota and LSU were kind of laughers.
Yeah, certainly
And so
LSU.
I
Yeah,
I think you're right that at some point, now that doesn't mean it has to be that way, but usually you're right. A team that's Final Four good, national championship good, when they're faced with this kind of matchup, takes care of business,
yeah.
right? And MSU did that eventually, and yeah, so it's a good sign. I will before the score got out of hand, I will admit that I was thinking a lot about parallels to 2019. I thought, well, okay, tough game in the first round, tougher than you expected.
Uh-huh.
And then in the second round, Richard Pitino sits there,
Yeah, yeah,
which was the
exactly.
case then, case now. And it's possible that in the Sweet 16, if MSU gets there, they could be facing a less than truly disciplined SEC team because Ole Miss is sitting on that other side
Right.
where they'll face Iowa State. No guarantees they'll be the underdog against Iowa State, but it's possible. So I was starting to see, and then potentially you could be in the Elite Eight, be facing a team that at a certain point in the season was designated to be the greatest team in college basketball history. It was Duke in 2019. And although nobody's quite saying that about Auburn anymore, they certainly were for most of the season.
Yeah.
Anyway, just for
Yeah.
fun, the parallels I happen
Yeah.
to notice. But then the game kind of got out of hand tonight, and it screwed with that a little bit. But we are seeing Richard Pitino in the next round, so that's a comfortable feeling for MSU
That
fans.
can't be comfortable for him, right? I mean, that's got to be sort of like, really? I mean, I'm sure he's happy to be
Well,
there, but
he's got a better I think he's got a better team than he ever had at Minnesota. I mean, we'll get into that a little
that's
bit
probably
later.
true. Yeah, we'll talk about that probably later too. All right, well, why don't we just kind of get rolling through things here because it is late at night and
Yeah.
I'm gonna make sure. Oh, there was a very funny comment. So on here, oh no, I can't find it now. But um, anyway, so yeah, let's go on and we'll talk about the player to keep in the gutter, which was Earl Timberlake, brought to you by the Brothers Just You Gutters. It is spring. It is March, and so it's time for rainy season. Although it's a little bit cold where I'm up near the Traverse City area, but yeah, it's got to make sure your gutters work properly, and make sure you have if you that you're not cleaning them out all the time, or if you don't want to clean them out, get on the ladder. Contact the Brothers Just You Gutters. They do fantastic work. As a listener to the show, you get 10% off. You just mention Final Four when you get your estimate, and you can get the estimate at our support page where you can find links for Kurt or Greg, depending which side of the state you live on, at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. There you can find links for that. Obviously, ways to donate the show, but this way, best way to get a hold of the brothers so they can do all the gutter work that you need. They specialize it. That's all they do. And so anyway, that's what I highly recommend you do because the 10% is nice. All right, so Earl Timberlake was the guy with the big giant cut. I think it almost looked like he got cut by that arm wristband thing that Carson Cooper wears. I don't
Yeah.
because he kind of like was sort of hugging the ball and his head, basically, and I think he just scraped it. That's what I think happened. But I'm surprised he could have any sort of thing that could cause a cut. Like they'd let you wear something that's some sort of
I'm
weird
always
bracelet thing.
surprised. I'm always
But
surprised when I see players come up with cuts, and it does happen.
yeah,
Like,
it
well,
was
what the
I mean,
hell are they
impressive
getting?
one.
The thing you would start with is maybe, oh, a fingernail got him. That could happen, but it didn't look like it on that play. I think you're
Yeah,
probably right.
I think it was that whatever that wristband thing is. So anyway,
Yeah.
he may not be wearing that anymore. I'm not sure. Um, so he had a rough game, and you mentioned actually, I don't know if it was before came on, just his strange shot. And I
Yeah.
was reading
Well,
somewhere
the
where
free.
he got injured. It's a couple years ago or something, and so it forced him to shoot
Yep.
differently in order to stay on the floor. And so he's got this weird like hitch in his free throw, and even
Yes.
his regular jump shot is a little bit strange too.
He doesn't take jump shots very often,
Well,
as you
that's true.
saw.
Yeah,
He
right.
didn't attempt one. Yeah, it's a very strange, and that's exactly it. It's a hitch in his release, and I don't remember him. I mean, I watched some of these games, but on that they play, I mentioned I watched parts of 3 games, but I don't. I guess I just wasn't zeroed in on his free throw shooting, and I don't remember that from him when he was at. I don't know that I ever saw him at Miami. I definitely saw him at Memphis,
Yeah,
and I don't remember that. But in any event, very strange. I would say it's hard to, he was 6 for 14 from the floor, which is not terrible. Two for
right.
four at the line. He had 14 points. He was one of 2 guys in double digits. Not that far off his seasonal average. 5 assists, 2 turnovers. He wasn't bad there. He had 2 blocks and a steal.
Yep.
Those are the things that he does for this. The one thing that Michigan State kind of limited him in was his rebounding. He's their top
Yeah, I
rebounder, I
just had
believe.
four.
He
Yeah.
only had 4, just one offensive, and I think he averages about 2.5 a game. So in that respect, Michigan State limited him. I certainly can't say MSU kept him in the gutter, but here's what I would say. If the path for Bryant to win this game almost certainly had to include more than this from Timberlake.
Absolutely. He had to
That's
be
the thing you
real
can say.
impactful, right? And he wasn't
Yeah.
impactful in that sense. Yeah. You
Yeah.
need a big game from him. You need like a John Tanjay sort of performance in order to beat
Right.
Michigan State. and they didn't get that from him. They got
And that's,
a
I'm interested that you mentioned that, and I was thinking about this.
it's intentional.
Tanjay.
Yeah.
Um, Michigan State has seen certainly some physical wings this year. Tanjay, the best of them, but there are other guys. Kobe Johnson at UCLA is one. Um, there are others in this league too that fit that category, but they haven't seen any. Timberlake is such a unique player, and I would say this. I think that very clearly he showed as an individual why he was ranked where he was as a recruit, and um, I think proved that he certainly belonged on that floor. I saw Izzo in his post game. He mentioned three guys. I'd definitely say two for sure demonstrated that they could play clearly at the Big Ten level. And I mean starting for a team at the Big Ten level. And he was one of them. So I don't think Michigan State kept him in the gutter, but I think they did what they had to do to prevent him from having the kind of game he probably needed to in order for them to compete.
Yep, I think so too. We'll call it gutter adjacent. It is one of those
Fine.
games where
That's
he
fine.
was
He was
downspout or
maybe
something,
just
right?
outside the drain.
Right? Not quite. Maybe just stuck with a couple leaves in there or something, but he's
Right.
kind of working his way down. All right, so uh, then who cleaned glass best? And as Big G mentioned here in the comments, he said Izzo called in the squeegee squad. That glass was clean, and they were
Yeah.
absolutely dominant. This we'll talk about in the keys.
Yeah.
Um, so, but when you need your glass clean, your windows clean, make sure you contact the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They're a very large region, obviously, around the Grand Rapids area. It's not just Grand Rapids. They are the professionals that the professionals call, if we want to call the state government professionals, I suppose. So they clean the state capitol windows. So they can do any job, not just your house, maybe your business, high rise, whatever you got. They can take care of it. They'll give you great pricing. And as a listener to the show, you get 15% off if you mention Final Four and you get your estimate. And of course, the place to go to get your estimate is our support page at tffinots.com/support. Contact the Squeegee Squad today. You'll be glad you did. They can take care of anything you need done, and you'll be very happy you did. All right, so I'm out of the competition in the sense that I can't win. Although by winning tonight, I had Kohler and Carr. They both had 9, giving me
Yeah.
18. You had Cooper had 9, but then Richardson only had 3, and so I win 18
Blasted.
to 18 to 12. Yes, I tore you apart on the boards, and I know I do not have to wear a basketball on my head, so that is my. So I
Are
survived.
we not are we not carrying that forward game by game, or was that a
Oh,
one
it's gonna.
time
It's
deal?
I'm no. It's any game. I'm at risk now. Since I lost, I will have to
Okay.
be humiliated at some point if I lose this competition, and I'll have to wear a basketball on my head.
I can live with that.
Oh, I'm sure you can. Yeah, even if I made you put a basketball, on my head, no one's gonna see it because you're behind the
Yeah,
curtain.
that's not
So
going to happen.
yeah, I know
Um,
exactly. So
what does that
anyway,
make it? 18-11?
no, it's 17-11. So
17-11.
yeah, because no
Sorry.
one won last game because the last game I think we
Right.
tied. So
I gotta say, I mean, there might have been a game this year where somebody had once we moved to the two-man combo that exceeded the 18 you had tonight. But boy, there I'm thinking about that Wisconsin game, the
well,
first one.
Kohler had
Whoever had
14 in one game, didn't he?
Jackson had 16 in that game,
Yeah,
but
that
I
was
don't
you,
remember.
by the way. Yeah,
Okay,
that
I
was
don't
you.
remember who I had paired with him, but 18 as a total has got to be right. Maybe that game had exceeded it, but that's probably the only one.
Yeah,
That was a
yeah. That
hell of a performance.
you were on quite a run for a while there, and so you're cleaning every other game. Kohler had a big game was when you had him, so that was
Right.
definitely
Thanks, Jax.
yeah. All right, so moving on to the keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing, and actually got a great comment from Beth Kroll. Said, "Thanks for connecting me with Nudge. I ordered a gift and loved it so much I kept it." so so I highly recommend it. I got my Nudge sweatshirt, and we are opening the store, I think, this week. So if you want our stuff, our Final Four's not in the schedule, logo, whatever, we're going to have that for t-shirts, hoodies, maybe hats. I'm not sure. Maybe other stuff. I'm not sure. I think I talked to Gabe. I am going to try and have him do a reverse one. So it's a white sweatshirt or hoodie with green logo, just so I have something when we have a whiteout. Because right now I don't really have anything except like light gray,
Hmm.
which
I was thinking.
they're
Yeah.
barely. Yeah, occasionally it only takes me a whole season to think of something like this. So anyway, we'll have that up and running, and that'll be probably at just Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS. If I had to guess, that's probably the website we'll use. There'll be a link to that, obviously, later. Uh, so check out Nudge Printing. You get 20% off. You just type in Final Four as one word at checkout. And if you do get a gift, make sure you get two. So if you just steal one, you have someone still to give as a gift. Really, there's a bad look if you buy a gift and don't get it. So keys of the game. The first key of the game was the boards, and we mentioned this is Michigan State dominant here. Overall, 54-29 edge. 21 offensive rebounds for a 54% offensive rebounding rate. That's easily
Yeah.
the best they've had this season. I know they've approached 50%, but I don't think they've really crossed that before. Uh, 20.5% with just 9 offensive rebounds for Bryant. They actually had more field goal attempts at Michigan State, partly because of the foul issue, I think, but also that first half with the turnovers
Yep.
and with a couple offensive rebounds, they definitely were getting more field goal attempts. They weren't making them, but they were getting more shots off, and so huge, win. And as you mentioned, the second half it just got ridiculous. Like every time they put up a shot, they're going to get one or two until the ball goes in. I mean, it'd be interesting. I don't have the splits again. I'm sure the second half offensive rebounding rate was probably closer to 70%, and the
Had to
first half
be.
was probably like 20. I mean, I'm just
Ha-
guessing because it was crazy.
Uh, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. There's probably a rebounding performance somewhere along the line that was more impressive than this one, but I'm hard pressed to think of it off the top of my head. And the reason I say that is, let's remember, this was not a typical 215 matchup in terms of size. You normally, so for example, I mentioned it earlier, you go back to Michigan's game, which was actually a 5-12 last night. UC San Diego is maybe a little more extreme version of that than you normally see, but that's closer to the truth than what you get from Bryant physically. You could see it. Bryant's got some men and they've got
Yeah.
good positional size. They only have the thing that's an issue, and maybe this is worth thinking about. They've only got one guy, Mitchell, who's truly 5-man sized. They're very big on the perimeter, but they only have that one guy. And Mitchell isn't a bruiser, and frankly he struggled to stay competitive in this game. But you look at Michigan State's three bigs in this game. So you had Jackson with 9 boards, you had Coop with 9 boards, and Zapala, who didn't even play very
4 minutes. Yeah, three boards.
didn't he have three? Did he have 3 or 4?
Three boards in 4 minutes. Just the
Yeah, I mean
first return.
that's that's getting some work done with your bigs, and I think as impressed the offensive rebounding is of course nuts. But we had said in the pregame, Bryant is kind of a mediocre defensive rebounding team, in part because they're so good blocking shots and they take a lot of risks. And we saw that evidenced in this game. There were times where Bryant was trying to make a big play with a shot block and took themselves out of position. But the fact that Michigan State limited whatever Bryant was, I'm forgetting where they were. I don't know if you've got it in front of you,
What's that?
where they were in terms of Ken Palm rank in offensive rebounding rate coming
Oh
into the
yeah, they
game.
were. I can get that in a second. They
Weren't they a
were
top 30 team?
54. So
54. Okay,
they were
top
really good
60
for
team.
for a non-Power Five school.
Yeah,
That's a really good
exactly.
number.
And for Michigan State to limit them to, you said it was 20%. That's remarkable. I will say this: if you watched any of Bryant, as I did, a few games here and there, they are one of the few teams in the country that legitimately does that old school Michigan State thing of 4 to the boards. Not
Right.
many people do that. Even good offensive. Michigan State doesn't do that really anymore. They haven't for years. But Bryant frequently does. I did not see them doing that all that much in this game. And I think it's because they were conscious of the risk that exposed them to if they didn't get offensive rebounds. So I don't know if that was part of what limited them, is that they didn't approach it the way they normally do out of fear and quite frankly, well reasoned fear, in my opinion. Um, it didn't help them. Michigan State still got into transition a ton of times, but I think that's for as remarkable as MSU's offensive rebounding was, I'm at least as impressed by what they did defensively because
Yeah.
that's a good offensive rebounding team. They emphasize it. They got tough, mature guys who you saw clearly in that game have the right kind of mentality to be a good rebounding team, and it just did not matter.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was it. You definitely saw the wearing down factor, especially once you hit about the 10-minute mark in the second half. They
Oh
just
yeah,
had not, there's nothing left in the tank for those
it
guys.
was ridiculous down the stretch. Yeah.
Second key to the game was a transition game, and this again, Michigan State, you could easily say won this. They had a 15-0 edge in fast break points. It's a little surprising. You expect a team to get at least like a bucket somewhere. It was partly, although they didn't have to make it off turnovers. The Bryant had 11 turnovers against Michigan State, only 7 against Bryant. I think Bryant had 5 in the second half, and Michigan State had 3. So Michigan State cleaned that up, but definitely in the second half. Points off turnovers, it was a 10-8 edge for Bryant. So basically a push there. Most of Michigan State's transition stuff came off of just defensive rebounds before Bryant had an opportunity to get set in their defense.
This is this used to be a hobby horse of mine in recent years that we've gotten away from this year because I felt that the numbers were closer to reflecting reality. I don't know
We're not
who's
in the
running.
Breslin Center. That probably helps.
I don't know who's running it in an NCAA tournament game, and yeah, not somebody Michigan State affiliated, but even road games in the Big Ten, I felt were pretty
Yeah.
on the money this year. So it wasn't just a friendly but that number, they only had 6 transition points in the second half because I know they had 9 at halftime. That strikes me as inaccurate.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll
It seems
leave.
a little bit.
Michigan State went up and down the floor against these guys, and it was a big, big part of why Bryant ran out of gas because they had everybody, all 5 guys on that floor, had to try to keep up with what Michigan State was doing in terms of running the floor. And Jim Spanarkel noted it a few times, the effectiveness, even though he wasn't the scorer on a play, that somebody like Jackson Kohler running the floor, what it does. And we all know that because we see it all the time.
Yeah.
We're used to when Michigan State's running game is humming, their 5 men are dragging the guy guarding them up and down the floor with trying to keep up with their rim running.
Yeah.
And you expect that over the last 10 minutes or so of a game, that's going to have an impact. And boy, it was one of the things that showed up in this one.
Yeah, I think the
On the
thing,
boards, it showed up. They had no energy left.
well, and yes, and I think the thing I never really appreciated until this year, I really started watching more, is that the role that 5 guy has, not only in getting either a lob or a pass ahead, which doesn't happen that often, it happens occasionally. Cooper seems to get those a little bit more, but the fact that they seal around the basket and so give a lane either for Carr coming in off the wing or the guard like Fears going straight to the hole, and so that's
Yeah.
a big role for that 5 guy, aside from just working the other 5 guy obviously really hard up and down the floor. All right, so the third key to the game was threes. This is one of those things where Bryant shoots a lot. They tend to not make a ton. They're not a great 3-point shooting team, but on the right night or wrong night, depending on how you look at it, that's an equalizer, and that was certainly something that could be trouble. And they hit some. I mean, they hit some in the first half. I don't have the first half, the half splits, but
They
it doesn't
hit
matter.
4. They made 4 in the first half. They
And
made
just one
1
in
in
the
the
second.
second.
Yeah, I was gonna say they
And
finished
it
five
came
for
late.
24. Yeah, right. It was late when the game was over. Yeah, 5 for 24 for the game, 20.8%. So not very good, obviously. Michigan State 10 for 26, and that for 38.5%. They're actually, if not for a couple threes like from Normand and Kurtang at the end,
Yep.
they're over plus 40%. I mean, you don't want to take away Akins because he was there during the actual important part of the game, where he went 2 for 10. This is, I get irritated. I shouldn't care that the talking point is they're 30.8%, which we've been following them all the season. They're almost 31% for the season. That must mean they've been shooting really well because they were
That's right.
pretty bad
And it,
below 30%, and they have been really good for the last 10 games, let's say,
yep.
where they're shooting kind of close to 40%. I mean, they're at least 35 to 40, somewhere in there usually.
They've been, look, Izzo's stated threshold for where he'd like them to be is 35%. And I would agree
Sure.
with that because that means when you're at that level, anything beyond 33%, you would say is better than the equivalent 50% from two, right? That's how
Exactly.
the math works. And so when you're 35% from three, that's the equivalent to a team shooting, whatever, 54% from two,
Hmm.
something like that, which is a very good number. That's a number you win with. Um, I don't expect anything else out of these guys. They put a graphic up on the screen at one point where they showed that despite Michigan State only shooting, I'm going to round up and say 31% from three on the year, that they're actually out shooting opponents by about 4%
Yeah.
from three because Michigan State has elite 3-point defense, which again showed up tonight. And Jim Spanarkel was still talking about how abysmal MSU's 3-point shooting. That's the
I,
thing to focus on. It's like, Jim, your own production crew put that number up to try to lead you by the nose to another thought, and you couldn't follow along
yeah, I mean they're 18 points better percentage points and on the similar volume too, which
tonight.
is
Yeah,
yeah, tonight.
yeah, and that was great to see. It was great to see kind of everybody, all the perimeter guys, getting into the act with that again. Other than Jaden was off, but everybody else was on,
Yeah.
and it was a number of different guys hitting them. So that was really great to see. Look, this Michigan State team shoots mid 30s from three. It can be a very, very difficult team to beat for
Yeah.
anybody. Duke, Auburn, Florida, Iowa State, Ole Miss, New Mexico, whoever. Doesn't matter. Um,
I noticed the one team you did mention in their bracket, the region.
no, they're not going to play them. So don't worry about that.
All right, so
Their
moving
their
on.
trip ends tomorrow.
Uh, th-
Um,
uh,
should have ended last night, but
well,
anyway,
they're clutch, man. I mean, in some ways, Michigan is clutch, but we're not going to talk about Michigan much here.
fortunate,
Yeah.
fortunate.
Uh,
Uh,
oh, go
I,
ahead
I
if you have
I
more to
will
add
I
to
will
threes.
say though, just to kind of put a bow on this, um, the Michigan State hitting threes the way they did is obviously very welcome news because as we were just talking about, it takes the one fly in the ointment offensively and turns that into a strength. And if that's the case, and they rebound and they run and they do all the other things, they defend, they do all the other things that they do well, they get to the line, they hit free throws. You're not beating them. You're
Yeah.
not if they because they're so good in every other area. But all that said, the thing that has been rock solid all year long and showed up again in this game is the way they defend the three. To hold that, I can't remember where Bryant was. I think they were about 32% from three, 33, something like that on the year
Yeah. That
coming
sounds
into
right.
the game. They held them to 20 or whatever it was, almost 21. We'll round up.
Yeah. Sure.
That's and that's what they do with regularity. That's what they do. So that was the thing. This talking point specifically was mostly, in my mind at least, was about the defensive end for MSU. That the path, and it's why I didn't think Bryant stood a great chance of winning this game. There were two reasons. One is the pace that they prefer to play at, which we'll talk about in a second, and the other thing is that normally in these kind of when you have upsets like this would have been, almost always 3-point shooting is a part of that. And it's not even just about, yeah, it's about them not being a great 3-point shooting team, but even more to the point, it's just you're going to have to be incredibly lucky to shoot well from three against Michigan State. You just are.
Right.
Nobody does it. There's a reason for that.
All right. So the fourth and key to the game was the free throw line. Michigan State was a little shaky starting out, and again, I think they just contribute a little bit to the fact that everyone's a little amped up, especially Jeremy.
Yep.
I think he missed. I think he was 2 for 4 to start the game, and then he had his next. Then he hit the rest of them.
It was the guy. It was the guys that you want at the line. It was Jeremy. It was
Yeah, Jaden
Jaden, and it
missed.
was
Jaden
Jace.
missed. Yeah, Jaden missed. So
And
anyway, they
the guy who got it on track is the guy who's made as much in the
who
way
started
of
at 40% for the
strides
season.
as anybody on this team, and that's
Yeah,
Coen Carr. Coen Carr started stepping to that line and draining them, and he's been doing that basically since what, late November?
yeah, he
Whenever he kind of
was.
started to turn it
Yeah, no, I
around.
think that's right. I think
Yeah.
it's yeah, it was maybe even yeah, it might have been
He's
December,
got
but
he's
sometime
got to
around
be
then.
up he's got to be up near 70% on the season right
He
now,
was over
which is
70%
remarkable.
before, I think. I
Okay.
have to check back, but yeah, so he's probably well over 70. Yeah, I mean, they finished the game 71.4, not great. I mean, 15 for 21. The 21 is nice. Definitely the focus of driving the lane, both for Jace and Coen, of course, causing some disruption, and Jeremy a couple times as well, really causing a lot of problems with it.
Yep.
Whether they're in man or zone, it didn't really matter. They attacked well, and so they got those were all earned 21 rebound or free throws.
Absolutely. The thing I'm happiest with to as a starting point is the 21 attempts.
Yeah, exactly.
That was indicative of exactly what we wanted to see, which is put this team under pressure.
Yeah.
And it's impressive when you consider how much of that game, less so in the second half because MSU really figured it out. Um, and we'll return to this in a second. That MSU was dealing with them
Hmm.
zoning them. And so it wasn't as easy for the guards to get to the rim and create contact, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so I was very happy with that. And then obviously, as you say, the percentage wasn't quite where it's been seasonally, but we've been talking about this. Michigan State's actually been struggling lately. And boy, the start of this game really had me wondering. I would imagine a lot of our listeners too. Oh boy, are we going to be leaving like 10, 12 points off the board because we're not cashing in on free throws? And that just stopped cold. The job they did in the second half was very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt very much like it. I've been watching the Drake game, obviously, because my dad went there, and Drake did everything they could to lose that game by just missing uncharacteristically,
Yeah.
80% free throw shooters,
Mi-
missing free throws. That's the
Michigan
pressure
had
of
the
the
same
tournament.
Michigan had the same problem.
Exactly. Michigan State.
Michigan's free throw performance was horrendous last night. It
Yeah.
definitely gave UC San Diego a path into that game.
Yeah.
And yeah, you
So
can kill yourself. So hats off to MSU for creating the contact and then eventually getting things on track in terms of converting them. And
I
that
do
needs
not
to continue.
I do not expect Michigan State to have the same game pressure on the next game. I think, the first game is tough. And then certainly a game to get in the Final Four, something like that. But a game to get in the Sweet 16 for Michigan State, it never seems to me like a game that there's a lot of game pressure. So I think I would not expect problems with the free throw line next game. Famous last words, right? All
Let's
right.
hope.
So fifth and final key of the game is zone. We saw Bryant pull the zone out quite a few times. It definitely caused disruption, at least from the flow up from an offensive standpoint for Michigan State, a little bit more in the first half than the second half. I think overall they were able to attack it, and they were relatively successful, or as successful as they were when they were playing man defense. It was certainly a chance for Bryant to kind of protect their guys and slow it down a little bit. But I think it didn't hurt them in the first half, but the second half, from a rebounding perspective, they just got
There you
destroyed.
go.
And so they didn't really play much zone in the second half after the first little bit. Now at that point, it didn't really matter what they did; they were just getting creamed on the board. So
Right.
I don't know. Overall, I think Michigan State did fine against the zone, and you shoot 42% from three or whatever, 40%. You can throw a zone, but also you've got three guards who can penetrate, four guards, right? Who can get in the lane and do stuff to you. So I don't know. Do what you want, I guess.
I
It's
think
Michigan
I
State.
think the rebounding thing is a big part of the reason why you have to be very careful if you make the decision to zone MSU. Um, I didn't notice New Mexico playing a ton of zone tonight against Marquette. Doesn't mean they won't try it. Um, but I tend to think they probably won't because they're actually kind of a spoiler alert. We'll get into this when we do the preview tomorrow. They're a very, very, very good defensive rebounding team, almost as good as Michigan State. They're top 20. I can't imagine that Richard Pitino is going to expose them to what MSU can do on the offensive glass by playing a bunch of zone. And I figure that he probably doesn't think he has to. Um, in this case, Bryant very clearly was using it to throw a monkey wrench into Michigan State's offense to force them to use a lot more clock, make them
Yeah.
indecisive, and it worked for a little while until it didn't. And part of why it didn't is Michigan State got much better in terms of executing against it. And part of it was what you had just discussed, that it made what was already going to be a problem a much, much worse problem. And I think smartly, Phil Martelli Jr. realized we can't do that. And
Yeah.
uh and so that's, yeah, I mean, that's the name of that tune. It's
Well,
it's just that simple. I think Michigan State did enough to force them to abandon it, and executed well enough when they did try it, obviously, to not have it become a big, big concern.
yeah, you've talked a number of times in the past about how you have a player who plays 6, 7 minutes is impactful, but then you start playing him 8 to 10 to 12, and then they start getting exposed, and their flaws come sort of are become liabilities. And I feel like that's sometimes with the zone. Like it works for a couple possessions, and
100%.
then if you start playing it too much, then you can get very comfortable playing against the zone because in some ways, well, many ways, it's easier to attack because it's like it's sort of the same way all the time, unless it's something that you do all the time, or you have different zones. You kind of throw all the different time, like a 2-3 or 1-2-1 or something like 1-3-1 zone or something like that. But anyway, certainly Michigan State
I,
was handled it just fine.
I have a comment on that. At halftime, um,
Candace Parker.
yes, but first, Jay Wright said, "Hey, I'd play zone the whole rest of the way." I understand what he was saying. I think in his mind, he was probably thinking, yeah, obviously he's fully aware of the problems that creates for you in terms of rebounding, but I don't think anybody necessarily foresaw just the utter dominance Michigan State would have in that area in the second half. And I think he was viewing it from the perspective of, hey, you got to halftime, you're still in the game. That was
Right.
what actually slowed them down. You probably don't have a chance to win if you try to guard them in man. I get it. I don't think it would have worked even if they tried this. I know it wouldn't have, but I get it. The Candace Parker line is, and look, I actually think she's really good. I think
Yeah.
she's
No, I
really
think
good on the studio. I don't mean to bag on her. It's just an area philosophically I have a lot of problems with. She made, just
you should say what it is. Yeah. Go ahead.
in
Yeah.
case
Yeah.
anybody missed it, what she said was, I always believe in having a zone in your back pocket that you can throw out there, just to disrupt things. And that is a philosophy that actually a decent amount of coaches have. There are people who actually believe that. I don't think it works. I think, generally speaking, if you're going to do things in a half-assed way, which if you don't regularly play zone, I don't think you can be successful in it. I think it's something you have to live and breathe in order to be any good at it.
Yeah.
You know, Jim Boeheim had the
Right.
success that he had over the course of his career with their zone because that's all they did. I am not a believer in, oh, we just have a half-ass zone that we throw out there a few possessions a game just to try to break up the rhythm, the opponent. It's the law of diminishing returns, is what you were referencing. That's
Hmm.
absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can maybe steal a few possessions, and maybe in the greater scheme of things, you could say, well, no, that's enough. That's all we want out of it. Just steal a few possessions, just break up rhythm. I don't think it works. And I really don't think it works against good opponents. I
Yeah.
understand why it's tempting to do it against this Michigan State team, because you look at the 3-point shooting, and even beyond that, if you, as these coaches all do, if you watch enough tape, you will see segments where Michigan State just doesn't execute very well against it. But almost invariably, I mean, did any of the games they lost this year happen as a result of a team really winning it by playing zone against them?
You can argue
Indiana,
Indiana, and that'd be the
Indiana,
game, right?
once,
Yeah.
once.
Right.
And I still think Michigan State absolutely should have won that game, even with all the trouble they had against
Yeah.
it. So I do not agree with Candace Parker's comment. And I think that this game shows you what happens. And I absolutely agree with what you said. The longer you play it, the worse it's going to get for you. I
Yeah.
just believe
Well,
that.
and we've talked before too. It feels very much like running a really intense full court press all the time, it exposed you too much in today's game with players who have better ball handling skills. And
Yep.
similar with now with zone, you don't have two guys who shoot and three guys who have to score in the paint like you did in the past. Now you have too many. There are too many options and too many guys who can
Yeah.
shoot, or can drive and can handle the ball and stuff. The zone is just it puts you at too much risk for problems, and of course rebounding. And there's just too many other problems that it causes that it causes more problems than it solves. I guess is the in today's game.
I completely agree. And I think it's a hard enough game to play well when seriously,
Yeah,
when you're responsible for guarding a man. When you're in essence responsible for guarding an area, that just create to me, it's just my opinion. I think it creates, as you said, way more problems than it solves. It as we've talked about a lot tonight, it creates major issues for you in terms of your ability to rebound defensively
yeah,
because you're not guarding a man, so you got to somehow find somebody to put a body on. That's not easy in a zone. And I think even just purely from a defensive point of view, I think it's really tough. It's really tough to play that well. And then in an era where we have a 3-point shot, this is the important thing too. I think sometimes a lot of people who advocate for it forget that we're in the 21st century and that we've had the 3-point shot from 1909 for closing in on 40 years now.
yeah.
I certainly remember a time where zones were effective. It was a time
Old
before the
man.
3-point shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michigan State won a national championship playing a matchup zone in 1979. That was great. They had great length on the perimeter, and it was a different era. But the moment the 3-point shot came into being, I think the zone's days were numbered.
Hmm.
It's just too easy of a shot to make for most college teams.
Yeah.
And I think that's and then you add in all the other problems with it. Yeah, so I'm just I didn't agree with her comment. I get where she's coming from, but I just don't think I would if it were me, my philosophy would be we want to do what we work on all the time.
Yeah.
And why play something that you don't practice really all that much, if ever? Just on this theory that somehow you're going to discombobulate the opponent. You might for a possession or two, but then it's over.
Yeah. You're not going to run a zone the last possession of a game because it's going to be different, right?
Some
It puts you too
teams will
much
do some teams will do
risk.
that where they might start a possession. That's another thing. The
Oh,
only
you
coach
switch
I've
that
ever the
way.
only
Yeah.
coach I've ever seen really execute that well at a high level, I thought, was Rick Pitino, not Richard Pitino. Rick Pitino.
Yeah.
Some of his he had a Louisville team. He might have done it for 2 or 3 years running, but there's a period of time. It wasn't something he did consistently. There was a period of time where he was constantly switching defenses between man and zone looks in the middle of a possession, and he's Rick Pitino. He's probably one of the five greatest college coaches who's ever lived, and so he can do that. But if you think you can do it, you're almost certainly wrong.
All right. Well, just a few comments before we go here. I got some comments and questions. So Tim Campbell wrote down, Tom Izzo said, half times are sometimes fun and sometimes they're not as fun. I think this is probably not one of those not as fun half times.
Yeah.
Someone else, Jason asked why Rod doesn't get a camera. He's in eternity. He likes his anonymity, so we protect that. Streetwise says hello from Shanghai. Thanks for the awesome content,
Wow.
fellows. I assume that's China, right? It's not like Shanghai, like
That's
Nebraska or something like that
there's only one
that
Shanghai.
I'm aware of.
I've been there. It's been a long time.
Yeah. And there's one question about Jackson Kohler. So he said Tim Campbell asked, he struggled offensively a little bit tonight. Do you think that's because of more doubling, double teaming, hedging to help? Uh, Thought he played okay defensively, and obviously was good rebounding both on both
Uh,
sides, offensive
I
defensively.
I thought, let's remember this is a high level shot blocking team.
Right. Hmm.
And even though they only have the one guy that's truly five sized, they've obviously, I mean, there were points that Timberlake was guarding him. I
Yeah.
noticed that. And guy blocks shots. They got a lot of guys to do that. I thought I thought their activity level inside, both in terms of um, contesting shots, and then also Jackson got stripped once or twice, I want to say. Definitely once. They're just really active, those guys with their hands. And I think that
Hmm.
that kind of that kind of limited him in some ways. I did think there was more there for him to get offensively than we saw in the end. So that was a little disappointing. But I thought Jackson competed. I thought he held up defensively. His rebounding was very much on par with what you come to expect from him. And so I don't have any complaints, but I would agree with that commenter that uh, he maybe didn't do as much offensively. And I think that it was there. I hesitate to say length because it's not like they got a bunch of 6'6" guys that have 7'2" wingspans, but they were effective at challenging stuff around the rim. And I
He
think
also
that's
only
what
played,
bothered him.
and I was going to say he also only played 19 minutes, and so I think that
Right.
that limited.
Well,
He only had six field goal attempts.
you're
Well,
right.
he didn't have any three attempts. I mean, we've been seeing recently with trailing threes. So it was a little different game. He had the foul trouble a little bit early in the first half, but he just stayed. They kept him staying fresh, I guess.
How often did we see Coen Carr at the four in this game? A lot. So that cut
He was
into
everywhere.
Jackson's. Yeah, that
Yeah,
cut into
for sure.
that cut into Jackson's minutes a little bit tonight. Maybe a lot.
All right. Well, we're gonna get some sleep, and then we're gonna
Well,
turn around and
I
be
want to make
back
one
tomorrow.
more
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
a couple quick comments we should make before we go. So first is New Mexico. We're going to do a full preview tomorrow, obviously, but
Yep.
I would just say there was some debate on the Spartan Mag board. Who would you rather see, Marquette or New Mexico? And I would have preferred to see Marquette, and not by a huge amount, but New Mexico is an interesting team because unlike this opponent MSU just played, they are a really good defensive rebounding team. And we know how much offensive rebounding means to Michigan State. They're another team that wants to play fast. That's putting it mildly. You might not believe that if you watch the Marquette game tonight, because that became very much a half court game both ways. But as we'll talk about, New Mexico is one of the fastest paced teams in America. Uh, they also turn people over. What they don't do is shoot very well. And so that'll create an interesting dynamic. We'll go into it in more detail, but I said it at the beginning of this. Patino's Minnesota team in 2019 that MSU beat in the tournament was actually pretty good. If you remember, they had Amir Coffey, who's in the NBA these days. They had a big kid, Daniel Turu, who was really good. They actually had some players. But I do think this New Mexico team is probably a little better than that group was.
Yeah.
So it'll be a challenge. They definitely deserve to beat Marquette. And yeah, so we'll break it down in more detail tomorrow. The other thing I wanted to mention before we go is all year long, or basically since Thanksgiving week, let's say, we have heard this endless drumbeat. The SEC is the greatest conference in college basketball history. And the Big Ten kind of got lost in the shuffle there.
Hmm.
I think, if I've got the numbers right, the SEC set a record. They had 14 teams in the tournament.
Right.
I think they went 8-6.
They have a quarter of the 34
Okay.
spots.
You know who
So does
else has, you know who else has
so
a
does the Big
quarter of them?
Ten.
Yeah. Big
Exactly.
Ten went 8-0.
Yeah.
Now, you will hear people say, and I will admit with some justification, well, this doesn't prove anything because it's a one and done format, and that doesn't change what you do over the course of a regular season. There's many, many more games, much larger sample size, and I agree with all of that. The trouble, however, with that analysis is that's not the way we as a society in the United States evaluate athletics. And it's not just college basketball, it's also professional sports as well.
Right.
How frequently Didn't happen this year, but very frequently you have seen teams with less than dominant regular seasons win the World Series. Occasionally, you'll see it happen in the NHL, the Stanley Cup. The Lions are a prime example of this. They had arguably the best regular season of anybody in the NFL, right? What
Yep.
do we remember?
Jaden
We remember
Daniels.
Jaden Daniels, yeah, and
Yeah.
Jared Goff having the worst day, his worst day of the season. That's what we remember. I'm not arguing that it should be that way, but what I am saying is that is the way that it is.
Right.
And so already, now the SEC could change that narrative if they manage to get, say, two or three teams into the Final Four, which is entirely possible. I mean, they still got eight alive. That's pretty good.
Right.
But the Big Ten's 8-0. And the Big Ten, seven of those wins were pretty goddamn decisive.
Yeah.
The one that wasn't was the one team that I picked to lose, and they somehow won by the skin of their
They
teeth.
always have been all season, pretty
Wow.
much. When
Not
it's been
always.
close, when it's close, they have.
Lately, not always. But in any event, I think that I've been a believer in the strength of the Big Ten from a general perspective anyway, all season. I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't try to make the argument that it's a better league than the SEC. I never believed that. But I think I've felt that the gap was somewhat closer than the analytic systems, the predictive metrics would suggest. I think if I remember correctly, I think I've got this right. Head to head against the Big Ten, the SEC was 10-9. So they had an advantage, but one game, not that big a deal. I more than the SEC comparison though, I just want to say hats off to the league, other than one team, because it's really impressive anytime you have that many teams in an event and you run the table in the first round. Now, from here, the script flips a little bit
Yeah.
because I mentioned
No
to
longer the
you,
favorites, right? Yeah.
right. What we didn't have in the Big Ten this year is we didn't have anybody on those 8, 9, 10, 11 seed lines.
Right.
Yeah, everybody was six and no, UCLA was a seven, I think. They
They're
were
the
the
lowest. Yep, at 7.
and they won on a walk over a Utah State team that people were picking to beat them. Wasn't even close. So I think that was the advantage, and I liked the matchups the Big Ten had, other than Michigan. That's God's honest truth. I didn't pick against Michigan because they're Michigan. I picked against them because I thought UC San Diego was exactly the kind of team that I could see really disrupting them, and they almost pulled it off. But everybody else, I really liked their first round matchups. Now, starting tomorrow, that script is going to get possibly flipped a little bit. Michigan State will certainly be a favorite. I would imagine Wisconsin and
Purdue,
Purdue
they're 4.
are favorites.
Maryland's a 4 as well, so they'd be I mean, by
Maryland will
seeding,
be a favorite.
those three would be
Yeah.
the 4
So
favorites, and the
half,
other.
so half of the four, half
Mhm.
of the four will be favorites most likely, and half won't be. I'm pretty sure Michigan's an underdog. Um, I would almost bet the house Illinois would be an underdog to Kentucky,
Mhm.
and I don't
UCLA to
recall
Tennessee,
UCLA will be an underdog to Tennessee.
and Oregon is
Then
playing Arizona.
yeah, that they'll probably be an underdog, but that one's the closest of those games in my mind to a toss up because I could
Sure.
see Oregon winning that game. I'm not a big believer in Arizona, but anyway, just to wrap it up, what a great 2 days for the Big Ten. Very impressive. And again, not just winning games, but blasting people.
Yeah, there haven't been really. Yeah, there's only, like you said, there's only one close game out of
One
8,
close
which
game.
is not what you'd expect, especially when you have a 7-10 matchup and you've got
I,
a couple 6-11s.
I
You
would
know,
say this has been from an entertainment perspective. I mean, there's always entertainment in this tournament, but it's been a little disappointing thus far.
not enough
The
buzzer beaters for
upsets,
you. Up overtimes, right? There
the
haven't been any
upset,
overtime games either.
yeah, you don't no buzzer beaters and overtimes. You don't the upsets that have occurred for the most part. Well, they're ones I got. Like I had Drake.
Yeah, that's 11's hardly an
I
upset. It's
had
an upset, I guess.
I had McNeese. I mean,
Hmm.
they're upsets that I don't even think were really upsets per se. I kind of expected, and I don't think I was alone. Um, but a little bit disappointing. The response to that, which I've already seen some people make, is that should make for a more entertaining next 2 days because you will have teams that, at least on paper, almost across the board, are more evenly matched, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully that bears out and we get some. I don't know how many, true massive upsets there will be on the table, but maybe at least we get some highly competitive games that go down to the wire. That would be fun. That's what we all come
Well,
for, right?
yes, although I'm very comfortable for Michigan State winning by 25 again. They can continue winning
Other
by
than that
25.
game,
I'll be
that's the
fine with
one
that.
we
It
don't
doesn't have
want,
to be
right?
exciting for me. I don't need another stress test. So anyway,
Right.
that's good. All right, so now I'm gonna go to bed, and we've got to post this, and we'll see you guys later today, I guess, with a preview of the second round matchup for Michigan State to get to the Sweet 16 against the Nevada. What are they? The Wolfpack or are they the Lobos? I
New
can't remember.
Mexico Lobos. We got to get
Lobos.
the
They are
right
the
Western
Lobos. That's what I
state.
thought.
The Nevada
Right? No, there's
Nevada
New
is the
Mexico State.
Wolf
I can't.
Pack.
What's? Oh, they're the Aggies. Yeah,
It's
Nevada's the
New
Wolfpack. Yeah,
Mexico
right.
Lobos in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. Beautiful Albuquerque, home of Breaking Bad. All right. So until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go green.